tonight's topic is talking about supporting our children with all things emotional health, mental health, just school engagement, helping them become more resilient, more engaged. And so feel free to use the chat tonight. As parents, you are experts. And so I know you have a lot of strategies and things that work for you as well. So feel free to ask a question or put something in the chat. You can also direct message me so no one else can see it. This session is being recorded now, but anything, your names and pictures will not be on the recording, as well as anything you put in the chat will not be on the recording as well. We have done different versions of these the last couple nights, last couple sessions we've had, and we talk a lot about, as parents, we are trying our best, but we are often exhausted and burnt out, worried about our children. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about is how important it is that we are taking care of ourselves, our mental health needs, as well as our physical needs. So feel free, any of you, to share on there. Tonight we're doing the squirrel scale. Where would you say you are on this scale tonight? How are you feeling? I would say today I was a little bit of a 5. And if hopefully you know how to use the chat. Okay, we have an 8. That's good. An 8 is very good. We need you tonight. We need your help in the energy. That's awesome. And as parents, it's going to change, right? You might be feeling different emotions. Sounds like Carrie's a 3. You know, you might be feeling at one point, you might be feeling a little bit like a 5. And then throughout the day, you might be feeling more of a 1 or even a 2. And so often how we're feeling and how we're managing can directly impact how we are with our children. And we say, you know, our children are going to be as healthy as we are. And you know, my girls are 25 and 26.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. So I often, as we're struggling, if we're not taking care of what's going on with us, it is going to impact our children. And so one of the things I encourage you tonight is just to kind of get a gauge of how you're doing. And if you're really struggling, reaching out for help and being mindful of taking care of yourself. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like tonight. And when we assess our own mental health needs, and oftentimes when parents come to me with concerns for their children, concerns for their family, one of the things that we really talk about is how are we doing with our own mental health, right? How are we doing with our own anxiety, our own, possibly, do we have any depression, mood issues? You know, are we struggling with addiction? And our kids are all, you know, very important to us, but they're also, most children are going to struggle at different points. And you've heard me say, just because a child is struggling today does not mean they're not going to be successful tomorrow. It's really how we come alongside and support the child in terms of building that resiliency and helping them take care of their mental health. We shared in the last session, oftentimes parents will feel like if my child's struggling with mental health issues or medical issues, I need to back off and really lower the expectations. But inadvertently, what happens when we do that is typically they start to get worse. And so oftentimes children that are struggling with anxiety, depression, autism, you know, OCD, they do better with routine and structure. They may not always like it. They may fight it, but often they really start to thrive. But it takes a while. It does not happen overnight. I used to say, and I remember someone had once told me when my girls were in middle school, which for us was the hardest. Yes is the easiest word you can say as a parent, because yes is easy, right? Yes, you can have what you want. Yes, you can do what you want. Yes, you can have your phone. Yes, you can, you know, have your games, because it doesn't have that conflict piece and that big reaction. But so often not having our children be accountable, not being able to set limits is going to decrease some of their resiliency factors. And if you have any questions about using the closed captioning, feel free to put it in the chat. I see if someone is trying to use it, and if you have any questions at all, just let us know. Does your child believe they are capable, accepted, and valued? Does your child believe that they can be successful either at home or in school? Just something to think about. I talk to a lot of both elementary and middle school and high school kids each week. And one of the things that I often ask them is, what does success look like for you? And I had a 14-year-old tell me that they didn't think their parents thought they could be successful. And I said, why do you think that? And they said, because they don't really expect much of me. They don't really believe I can handle a lot. And so I don't think that they think that I can be successful. We had a really good conversation around that. It was eye-opening. So a couple of things, and this is going to kind of piggyback a little bit of a review, but think about tonight what motivates your child. If you have any ideas, put a couple of them in the chat. What are some things that for your child, whether they're 2 or 3 years old, whether they are
Hey, Jackie, I think you're muted. We're having a hard time hearing you. Can you try to unmute yourself?
yes, I just did.
There you go. Okay. Sorry, we couldn't hear maybe the like last 30 seconds of what you were saying.
Okay. There was like a thing that kept coming up about closed captioning and muting, and then it was
I think we're good now. Yeah,
okay.
sorry about that.
No problem. Sorry about that, everyone. Can everyone hear now? Hopefully. So just think about kind of what motivates your child in terms of those areas. Hopefully you heard those. Think about what you would define as success. If you have a child who really struggles, maybe going to school, or you have a child who really struggles with social skills, you might not be able to expect that they're going to go from, maybe, not talking to anyone or not going to school to all of a sudden going every day and doing really well. You might want to look at success as small steps. Every child is going to be a little bit different. So you might have 2 children in your home, and for one child something might come really easy to them, and for another child it might be more difficult. Maybe they're more apprehensive, maybe they're more anxious. It's important to praise the effort. It's important to praise the child trying to come out of their comfort zone and maybe even do something a little bit different. And also, as we talk tonight, how do you respond to a child maybe when they're having anxiety, or they're not feeling well, or they are having a difficult time? And discomfort can look a little bit different for each child, but children will struggle, and some children will have really big reactions, right? Some children, when you try to set a limit, they will get really, really upset. It doesn't mean that the child doesn't do well with limits. It means that they're probably not consistent, right? From a school standpoint, we find that in school, most children will do good when they're in a structured setting and there's routine and they know what to expect. Sometimes that even happens with using visuals and having kind of a schedule so that everybody's on the same page. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. If you are somebody that struggles with anxiety and you struggle with worrying about your child, and you recognize that when your child's struggling, your anxiety heightens, it's going to be even more important to make sure you stay calm. And when the child is struggling, you don't want to be doing a lot of talking. You don't want to be doing a lot of reassurance. You want to stay calm and help co-regulate with the child. If you struggle with anger, if you struggle with big emotions yourself, it's going to be important to regulate with your child, because ultimately we teach our children how to manage emotions by how we manage. I always laugh. Both my girls, I don't know if they listened to much of what I said, but they act just like me as adults. So we are teaching our children how to act by how we act. And that's probably, the simplest way to put it. And I can promise you it's true. If your child starts panicking and then you're panicking and no one has a plan, everybody's just kind of either yelling and talking or crying, it kind of makes everything just explode and nobody feels really comfortable in the situation. So we've been talking a lot about how to feel more connected to our children, how to help them become more resilient. What would you say are some things that help you communicate more effectively with your child? Feel free to put it in the chat, and then we're going to talk about what hurts communication, and I'm going to share with you some things that the children I work with have said. So first, let's do what helps. Feel free just to put a line or two in the chat of what you feel does help. I love, Nikki, that lead by example. Active listening. Okay, that's good. Listening. I like that. I love the listening and active listening, because so often the children I work with will tell me that they feel like the adults in their lives are distracted and on their phones and are preoccupied, and that they just love the opportunity to come to therapy because they want someone to actively just listen to them, not give advice necessarily, but just hear them. Not having to have the right answer right away. I think that's a great example too of asking how they might be feeling, but allowing them to share. And sometimes we as parents may disagree with something they're saying, but it's okay to try to learn more and listen, as opposed to having a big reaction. And I think I remember someone had taught me when my daughter was going off to college that she's gonna come to me with all kinds of crazy ideas, and I'm gonna wanna crawl in a hole with some of the ideas, and I'm not gonna love them. And they said, just don't react, other than really listen and say something like, I want to learn more about it. Why don't you gather some more information on this topic and then come back to me and we can discuss it, or something like that. And it sounds silly, but it can't tell you how much it worked for me, because I remember she was in college and she came to me and she said, and I've shared this before, I'm thinking after college, I'm going to go for a year and just travel and be a bartender on a cruise ship. It was some whole funny story she had, but she was dead serious. And my first instinct and response was to be like, that's ridiculous. You're not doing that. That's silly. But, and I think I did say that at first, but then I really kind of came around and I did try it. I said, why don't you go research and tell me more about your ideas, and then we'll talk about it. And what was nice, I stayed calm. The nice thing was she never even came back, because she didn't do the research, and it was just a fleeting idea that she wanted to feel heard. And if I had shut it down, number one, it would have made the idea that much bigger. And two, it would have made her feel that I wasn't listening to her. Yeah, and I love that too. I've told both my kids, if you ever need to just vent and don't need me to try to fix it, just tell me you need to vent. I think that's great. And because sometimes kids do want to hear that. What would you say hurts communication? What are things that you would say hurts our connection with our children, or hurts our communication? And I think kids a lot of times will tell me nagging is one. They feel when they get yelling. That's a great example. We're all going to yell, I've made every mistake under the sun as a parent. We're not screwing up our kids by making mistakes. We're human. We're trying to do better. We're trying to learn. But, so if you do some of these things, we all do it. There's no perfect parent. There's no perfect child, but it's just learning more about how to connect and help our kids become more resilient. So yelling is definitely one. Putting them down, shame is another one. And another one I hear a lot is power struggling with them, kind of the back and forth, the yelling, the power struggling, and the empty threats that we're not following through with. So those things do happen when we're frustrated and when we're not in tune to our own stuff, but oftentimes that can hurt communication. So does your intention match what you are actually communicating? If you are trying to work on helping your child improve confidence, but then maybe you're really frustrated with them and you're telling them how lazy they are and they're not accomplishing anything. And sometimes you just have to kind of take a step back and, is my goal for my child of what I'm trying to accomplish match my intention? I want my child to do better in school, yet I'm like harping on their grades. Is the two in line? So here's an example. What if, and this is work kind of written by some kids. I want my child to be happy. And I'm guessing many of you on here want your child to be happy. That might be our intention, right? So we say yes a lot. We don't give that many limits. We overly reassure them. We tell them they're really great. We tell them they're really wonderful, because we want them to be happy. And I think many of you know that this can get us into a slippery slope. What really usually happens is the child feels less confident, and they may think that the expectation is to always be happy. And when they're not feeling happy, they feel like almost like a failure, or they start to feel really depressed. Like, if I can't achieve this happiness, then something has to be really wrong. Another example, I want my child to be really successful. I might remind them often, apply pressure. I might make unrealistic demands. Really, the child might feel more frustrated and really just start to feel failure. I'm going to give you examples of how to flip these in a minute, so don't worry. I want my child to be more respectful. I hear this one a lot from parents. And so I might nag, I might power struggle, I might yell at them because I'm so frustrated with them and they're not being respectful. And for a lot of us, this is how we grew up with our parents. Kind of, that was the response many of our parents gave us. And for us, that's kind of what we know, right? So our child really ultimately will start to mirror our reactions. And if we start to yell and power struggle, you will start to see the child emulate some of those behaviors. So flipping it a little bit, I want my child to be happy. Usually what parents are meaning is I want my child to be healthy. Listen and validate, like I think Nikki had said, staying calm, connecting with the child, even working on different gratitude practices. Happy usually is really about being healthy. And so helping children realize it's okay to feel all emotions, that I'm not trying to get you to feel happy. I'm okay with you feeling sad. I'm okay with you feeling angry. I'm okay with you feeling anxious. I'm not gonna try to move your feeling into happiness. I'm okay with whatever feeling you have, and we can be present with that. Child will learn over time to embrace their feelings and feel more connected and feel like it's okay to feel other things other than just happy. And if you have any questions, feel free, or comments. I want my child to be successful, working on setting realistic expectations, praising growth. Maybe they're trying new things. For instance, whether it's, school or homework, or how they treat others. What are those expectations, and are we pretty consistent with how we respond? Ultimately, the child is going to feel more successful, and they are going to be more willing to take chances, and they're going to start to feel better about themselves. I want my child to be more respectful, setting consistent limits, modeling desired behaviors, and really trying to regulate emotions with them. So often it's not that children are trying to give us a hard time, they're having a hard time. And when our kids start to struggle and they start to have big emotions, what they usually need from us is to come in and be calm, but have a plan to help them feel safe. If we don't have a plan and we're reacting based off of our feelings, how they're feeling, then the child is not going to feel secure in that environment. Ultimately, then the child will start to follow the directions, it doesn't happen overnight. And I always tell parents, if you're going to do something different, you have to be consistent for 2 weeks and then assess if it works. But initially, the child might really be upset, might be really angry, might give you huge behavior responses, might yell, might scream. If there's technology addiction that we're going to touch on, they may punch holes in the wall. Most parents obviously don't want to deal with that part. And so what happens is for a lot of parents, they then go backwards on the limits and say, okay, well, if this is what's going to happen, then I can't deal with this. So we're going to revert. It will make the child's behaviors go down, but ultimately it's going to get worse as time goes on. So one thing someone had said to me once, and it was something I really kind of held on to, is what do you typically say to your child after you have not seen them for a little bit? You know, what if maybe they've been at school all day, maybe they were with a friend, maybe they've been on their video game, maybe you were at work. What are some of the first things that you would say to them? And feel free again to put in the chat. And what would your child say that matters to you in terms of like your parenting or in terms of your relationship with your child? What do you think your child would say? And if you're not sure, you can ask them. And sometimes kids will be very honest and they will tell you how they're really feeling, which is good. It's hard sometimes to hear, but it can yield some good information. Okay, asking how their day was. I love that. And sometimes kids might say something, sometimes kids might say something like it was fine. And sometimes you can do the high and the low, what's something that went well and something that was difficult today. Sometimes you can try to do both, you know, what's something that we're proud of today and something that we totally embarrassed us at school, and learn to kind of accept both the things that went well and the things that were difficult. And I think there's also asking them how their day was. I love that someone put that. I think Jen trying to do these little messages. I think if your kids do put themselves down, it's a good, and sometimes kids are doing that to get a certain response out of us. And so kind of looking at when they're telling us that and what's going on. But you know, I think kind of talking to them about if that's something they're saying, if they're saying they don't like themselves, if they're saying they think they're lazy, you don't want to get into a habit, or they're constantly saying kind of negative things about themselves and you're constantly having to reassure them and make them feel better. But you do want to help them, you know, identify, you know, areas that they feel good about with themselves. That's awesome. I love that. I asked who they helped today. And, you know, did you have fun? How was the day? What is something you learned today? I think those are great questions. I know sometimes when times are really stressed, I think many parents will talk about, can get caught up in, you know, asking about like, who did you sit with, or how did you do on that test? Or, you know, even did you get in trouble today? And I think those questions are a little bit more leading versus, I love the questions that you guys put on here. And sometimes our children will just look sad after school, and that can raise our anxiety. And so we might have a tendency to right away kind of rush in and say what happened, but that just might be where they're at and how they're feeling. Because I know for a lot of kids, they're just really tired. So these are conversation busters. These are things that will not be helpful to do. For most children, I would say pretty much any children, threatening, empty threats, threatening, you know, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. If I have to tell you one more time, then I'm whipping that away from you. You know, being overly confrontational, especially if the child is feeling very anxious, or the child is crying, or the child is even in a temper tantrum. You know, you don't want to necessarily go in and be overly reactive. And it sounds silly, but is all you're doing is you're putting gasoline on a fire. So what you want to do is stay calm, and then discipline once they've kind of calmed down a little bit. You know, yanking a child even into a timeout when they're screaming and yelling is not going to be as effective. working with them. And I do this with teachers all the time, working with the student on co-regulating, getting calm, getting a baseline, and then, engaging in the discipline as the next step. And I know that's tricky to do because our kids know how to push our buttons and they know how to get at us. And sometimes we just lose it. And that's that again, we're human. And so making time to go back and apologize if you feel like you've lost it with the child. And I shared in the last session, one thing I did a lot, especially when my girls were in middle and high school, is I would just ask whenever I was starting to feel a reaction, a big reaction, is this about me or is this about them? And oftentimes I would walk away and I would shelve it until I was in a different mindset. Maybe I was exhausted or maybe I was stressed from work. And I would kind of respond once I felt calm. And 9 times out of 10, it was a totally different reaction than I would have given if it was when I was stressed. Um, I would say expecting perfection, being mindful that our kids are kids. Even I work a lot with athletes and their parents, and some parents are sometimes expecting these kids to be like, they're 10 and maybe they're expecting them, to be amazing out there. I had one mom and she was actually a friend of mine, we're paying all this money for sports, he's not even doing that good out there. And I'm like, he's 10, I mean, what are your expectations for a 10-year-old? Even when they say, I really love this sport and I want to play it, in college, they're 10, they're 8, they're 12. It's going to change throughout time. And so we want to make sure that we are fluid with them. Creating shame, obviously, and again, many of us probably dealt with that with our own teachers in schools. When we were children, we joke when we were little, you had to stand in the back of the room and face the wall. I think a lot of that was parenting when we grew up, right? And I think we're learning that it wasn't as effective as maybe our parents thought it was. Intimidation, overreacting, and lack of belonging. These are just things that ultimately will not motivate behavior. They will not help the child to do more of what you want. If anything, it will probably send the child the other way. And this one I laugh at too. You think about, what do parents care about and what do children care about? It's they're not always the same, right? And so you have to kind of start to realize that even though maybe your child is 10, emotionally they might even be more like 6 or 7. And so remembering that sometimes, having conversations with them, their perspective and the way they see things and the way they understand things and what motivates them is going to be a lot different than it is for you. And I gave the example during the last parenting session of a parent that got really upset that he thought their child was lying. He said, my child is lying. I don't tolerate lying. And really, it was the child's perspective. It wasn't that the child was lying. The child has kind of a limited view in terms of how they see their world around them. And so sometimes when we try to talk to kids like they're adults, we have to keep in mind that they're a lot younger and we want to hear their feelings and we want to validate what they're going through, but we don't want to be asking younger children to make huge decisions about their future or to have conversations with us that we would with an adult. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat. So when you think of the mindset of resilient children, you think about, and there's been a lot of studies on this. We talk about, when you think about what resiliency means, resiliency a lot of times is that someone has the ability to come out of their comfort zone. They have the ability to take risks. They have the ability to bounce back when things don't go the way they want them to. Typically, they are developing confidence. They have some confidence and they feel secure in their home environment. And you see that in how they are in school as well. I work with a lot of athletes too, and we do this when we're working with even developing players, developing teams. You think about kind of how we develop resilient athletes, how we develop resilient athletes. It has a lot to do with these different qualities. And so these are some qualities that there's been a lot of research around, that when we start to really nurture these different areas, it really does equate into helping our children be more even resilient. And so these are different areas and I just wanted to touch on, but I think when you're coming from the parenting lens, it really is about starting to allow our children to make mistakes and to bounce back, but also to be accountable for their choices. Also, children do better with limits. Children do better with choices, but not necessarily choices of like, do you want to go to school? But choices in terms of, you know what, you can choose to go to school or you can choose to stay home, but this is what's going to happen if you go to school, and this is what's going to happen if you stay home. You know, with a lot of the athletes I work with, and I'm going to use athletes for a second, they struggle. And the biggest thing I notice is when they struggle with resiliency and confidence, and they possibly have anxiety or fear of failure, what happens is they kind of play in a bubble. They stay in a very safe zone. They don't take a lot of risks. They have a hard time with criticism. They have a hard time with feedback. They fall apart pretty quickly. Oftentimes they are not able to sustain in their sport, right? They burn out. And so with our children, we see this in school too. Oftentimes children that struggle with confidence, they struggle with feeling successful, they struggle with maybe there's not a lot of limits or structure at home, they struggle with transition to school. We see these are key areas. As we start to address, it alters and it changes how they're doing overall. And so also one of the things that I work a lot with kids on is helping them develop a passion for something. You know, are you passionate about something at school? Are you passionate about something with friends? Are you passionate about something in your community? It's interesting. I have a lot of kids in our waiting room. We have 30 therapists between two offices, and I can go out to any one of the waiting rooms, and oftentimes kids and parents and everybody's on a computer, they're on a phone, they're on some technology device. And that can be telling at times, right? And so one of the things, one of the 12-year-old boys that I work with asked me to get him a puzzle. And so I got a puzzle and I brought it to my office today, and it was a kind of a complicated puzzle. It was like a puzzle of like New York City. So there's like many pieces to this puzzle. And one of the kids had seen the puzzle in my office and said, "Hey, can I open the puzzle?" And I said, "Sure, you can open the puzzle." And literally, I think it was like at 2 in the afternoon, she got so excited playing with this puzzle. And then she had to leave it on the table because there were so many pieces. Next person comes in, high school boy, did not even say anything to me, just dove into the puzzle and had so much fun with the puzzle. And that went on for the next couple hours. And it's interesting to me that we're so quick to, you know, give kids electronics, but God, these kids get so excited by like building and creating and making art that I think we just need to expose them to different things other than just technology, and they will start to find their passions. Making sure every child has someone at school that they would say is their champion, someone at school that they're connected with, making sure that they have a connection with us in the home. If you have a child that constantly just goes in their room and slams the door, maybe kind of figure out what's motivating that. You know, some parents will say there's no technology at all in the bedrooms and it's only in the main living area. And they do that because they want all of the family engaged in that main area. Helping the child develop personal goals, helping the child to kind of come out and figure out what those goals might look like. And then meeting expectations. And the meeting expectations comes when we hold them to it. And, you know, I know you all have heard me say, but like I have my own, you know, definite, I have my own anxiety at times. And if I worked for a boss, and I have many years ago, that was unpredictable, and one morning would be fine if I was late and one morning wouldn't, it was just, I never knew what to expect. And there wasn't a lot of routine, that made me feel more anxious. So for a lot of our kids, when they're not functioning, one of the things functioning well, whether it's in the school or at home, one of the things I try to work on is bringing some structure and consistency for the child. And again, it takes 2 weeks, but once I can get the child stabilized, then usually I start seeing all these other ingredients come to play. It takes time, takes a lot of work, but doing the work now will make it way easier on the back end. And a lot of kids like visuals. They like seeing the expectations. They like seeing even progress, on a visual. So I know many of you, I can already tell by your messages, validate your children. And these are some of the things that when we're talking about just connecting and helping our children to feel validated and heard, talking less and just listening. I think anytime, if you have a child that maybe is a little bit more on the anxious side, don't do a lot of talking in the morning during transitions, but really kind of keeping it light. Sometimes even like some fun music in the morning, but we're not doing a lot of talking because that can just cause a lot more anxiety. As you all have said, is being compassionate and empathetic, really trying to hear the child. That does not mean that, as a parent, I'm saying, this is kind of my boundary, and this is our expectation. For instance, if you're not completing your homework or you're not following directions at school, then there is going to be a loss of privilege at home, because our expectation is that you are in school and, you're engaging in class. And the child maybe says, I feel sad when you take my Xbox. That doesn't mean that, you're saying, okay, I hear you, here's your Xbox. It might mean, I hear you, and that's got to be really challenging for you. We're setting these limits because we know that you can handle it, and we want you to see that. Communicate and respond to what is happening versus just a judgment. I think sometimes as parents, the kids will tell me that we can be very judgmental and harsh, but allowing the child to try different things and take it more from a learning lens, be open to when they make mistakes or when they do things differently. I love how someone put in the chat, don't give the answers, ask the child, what's something that you think you could do, or what's something that worked for you in the past, and encouraging them to problem solve. Acknowledge that failure is actually a good thing, right? Acknowledge difficult things. We want you to fail. We all fail at different things. We want you to do that because it'll help you grow. I always tell kids, I want you to practice making mistakes. Even let's say it's a test coming up or a sporting event. I want you to practice making mistakes. I want you to try to do something different. And if it doesn't work out, then at least you were able to see that you could try something different. Yeah, that's good. Even sometimes asking like, what would be a fair consequence? It's funny because our kids are so often, when I ask the kids in my office about things, they are on the same page with everything I'm saying. When they're in a stable place, when the kids aren't and they're not in a good place and they're really struggling, they're not going to have the same insight. This is my favorite one. The last one, pause, give it a moment before you respond. Sometimes, allowing yourself to have a minute just to reflect versus reacting. I think we can all be very, at least for me, be very reactive. And in parenting, the times that I was proudest of my parenting responses were the times that I walked away and I regrouped and came back. Even those times when I was very, very angry, and I had every right under the sun to be angry because my kids did the craziest things at times. I knew that if I lost my cool, again, not perfect, but it made the situation worse. So, well, ultimately I felt bad about myself. I felt regret for what I said or did. And so I also wasn't teaching the child anything. And so one of the things I had to really kind of continue to practice is visualizing how I wanted our interactions to go and just behaving my way through that, like I've said. And oftentimes we are so upset with them and we just want them to be healthy and happy, that our responses are because we care so much and we're so passionate. But sometimes our kids are going to really struggle. And when we do go in to set limits or do things differently, it is going to get worse before it gets better. And sometimes it's going to take a little bit of time to know that you do have to stay the course for a couple weeks and know that it will get better. And this is really true. Your superpower is based on you being present and aware, and you being emotionally healthy. The healthier we are, the healthier our children are going to be. And we have a unique opportunity to catch a lot before it ever happens with our children. A lot of times we can see things, right? You can see, I had a young mom that said, gosh, my 4-year-old already is having a rage when I'm pulling the iPad. And we talked about how some kids, they can't handle a lot of electronics. Again, if you have ADHD, anxiety, or autism, you're even more prone to addiction. For some kids, we have to be more mindful that they don't do as well with some of that outside of structured times of school. And so you might have to be careful kind of where you set it up in the house, how you teach to use it, really teaching about how to use tech and even how it can be addictive. Many of the devices, and I was sharing at a 10-year-old was teaching me about something on the phone that they were doing through Snapchat. And I was like, I could not believe this 10-year-old. And this is how out of date I am. And these kids teach me all the time. But this 10-year-old said, um, you know, a lot of the kids in my grade are through Snapchat were on these sites. And one of the sites was OnlyFans, which, which as you know, can be a lot of naked pictures and things like that. And the child at 10, they knew how to navigate all this stuff and get through it through Snapchat. I had no idea you could do this through Snapchat. My kids are a little bit older, but it made me realize I have to get myself educated on some of these things because I didn't realize that younger children through Snapchat could get to these sites. But one of them learns how, and they all do. So knowing what your child's doing on the technology is going to be important too, as well as supervising, depending on the child. You might need to even supervise a little bit more or be really aware of what they're doing. Um, we only, if we're in tune with ourselves, as we've talked about today, if we're getting the help we need for ourselves, it's going to help us with our children. So the more we can make sure we're in a good mental place, our families are in a good emotional place, the better off we're going to be able to manage some of these really difficult behaviors with our children. And then the one thing I always share with teachers is I'm going to share with you, trying to give kids 3 positives for every one piece of criticism. And so if you have a child that you're constantly having to remind and nag and the child's not doing what you want, trying to kind of think about what those expectations are and working towards trying to find things that you can praise the child for. Again, it might be more effort, it might be growth. It might be a child that you're like, there's not much to praise at this time. You might have to think outside the box. And again, every child's going to develop differently. A child might look like a huge superstar when they're in 2nd grade, but then really struggle when they're in 8th. A child might look really like they're struggling in younger grades, but then be really successful. And so this is all normal. It's really how we kind of help support them through it. So these are just a couple other, pointers. And this is something that we talk a lot about in family sessions and in parenting sessions is just going through some of these different strategies, helping our children learn that they can have some influence on how they feel. Maybe you have a child that is like, nothing's ever changing. It's everyone else's fault. I'm always this way. Helping them learn that there are things that they can do. And sometimes I do that through even asking, what do you think you could do about this? Or what are things that you think would be helpful for you or that you've tried? And, really making it about they have some influence in terms of how they feel, day to day, as well as how they feel in terms of their friendships. I know you hear me say a lot, don't try harder, try different, but, kind of teaching kids that if we're doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, that is ultimately the definition of insanity. So let's do something different and see what happens. Helping children know, we have limits because we love you and we want you to thrive. And right now things aren't going well, right? Like you're not doing well. We can't keep going on like this when you're not doing well. So we need to do something different. And maybe it is a child that you find out that they're kind of, sneaking, they're not doing their homework, they're on inappropriate sites on the phone. it's okay to say like, this isn't healthy. We have to do something different. It's not so much the child that's the problem. We have to do something different. And then the rest, you can kind of see, but I think the biggest is consistency and helping children understand that there are boundaries, and we teach our children about how they should be treated by others. So we teach our children how they should be treated by others. How we set boundaries with our children is teaching our children how to set boundaries with others. And it's also teaching our children how to respond to ways that they're being treated. I had a girl that she was really, parents have really struggled setting limits and boundaries. And now she's 16 and she's in a relationship with a boy that's abusive with her. And we've talked a lot about, how can she set boundaries? And she said, my parents didn't have a lot of boundaries with me. I'm not really sure how to set those. And we've really had to look at that a little bit. So thinking about, sometimes we avoid distress in the moment, but when we look at where we want to see our child in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, is our parenting reflective of where we want to see that child, or is it more reflective of kind of right now and trying to avoid turmoil? And so these things, if you're struggling with any of these, I would definitely reach out and talk to somebody and work on how do we want to shift our parenting a little bit at home. And some children are tough. I mean, some children are relentless. It's always, sometimes too, the smarter kids can be the hardest. I have a lot of kids that are highly intelligent, and they are masterminds, and they can be tough. They end up being some of my favorites, but they can be tough. And so it is not, it's okay sometimes to love your child, but not like them. It's reality. We're parents, we're human. Every parent I've ever talked to in my life has struggled with their child at some point and has struggled saying, gosh, I'm having a hard time liking this child today. So that is normal. If you feel like, no, that's not me, I love my child all the time, they're amazing, you're lucky, but you are definitely in a little bit of the minority. We have an awesome executive functioning coach at our office, Lauren Bilbrey. If you know her, we work a lot with kids on teaching them what we call executive functioning skills. Teaching them just in terms of even classwork and how to manage when they're overwhelmed. And so I said earlier, kids and families overall tend to do better with some organization. And so even having like a whiteboard or a big board where, visuals of expectations, how we treat others in the family, how we treat each other, responsibility for work or for sport, how we are going to show up and, put our effort in, how we're going to treat others. And we're trying to use a lot of the same language, but that organization, those visuals can a lot of times help the child. And so these are just some other things that we're really working on in terms of teaching from a therapeutic perspective, but they're also things that, you can really be instrumental in teaching at home. And these are just some other tips as well, helping the child figure out what the child's strengths are. Everyone in the family is going to have something that they're bringing to the table. How do we all maximize on our strengths? Maybe you have one child that's really creative. Maybe that child can really add by, helping create signs for the family, helping create different things for the family, or leading the family in crafts. Maybe you have another child that's really good at building, or you have another child that's really good at like puzzles or even video games. Having everyone have a chance to shine. Maybe there's like a family night once a week, and each child can lead the activity or lead whatever it is, but everybody is going to really have a chance to shine. How do we, as a family, talk about, we're all going to be struggling with different things, and how do we, practice different coping strategies? And the only other one, just due to time, that we do a lot, if you're doing homework with children after school, a lot of them, when you think about their home environment, I would recommend not having any technology in their bedrooms. For me, that was just made life easier. We didn't have TVs. We just didn't have any of that, especially until they were a little bit older, they had laptops, which they could use as like TVs and stuff, but it wasn't until they were older. And it helped them be able to organize, like the bedroom was for sleeping, the desk was for homework. We tried to keep things a little bit more organized, and it just made things easier. And so you might have a child that it doesn't really matter, and they can kind of do homework anywhere, standing up on their head or in the middle of a pile of clothes. But for a lot of kids, they will go in the room and they just spin and they don't get a lot done. Eat the frog first is a lot of times if you have a certain class or subject that you really struggle with, maybe you have a really low frustration tolerance. We're hearing this now a lot, is the child doesn't want to do a non-preferred activity. We say eat the frog first, take the hardest possible thing on your list and do it first. And that can make the rest of the night easier in terms of the steps with the homework. Sometimes even we do a lot at our center of, each child will have like a Google Calendar, and we kind of map out and teach them how to prioritize work, teach them how to identify successes that they've done well in school. And the kids love it. They love seeing things organized. They love when their houses are organized. They love when they have a clear place to work. They're not always going to tell you this, but that's going to be huge for a lot of them. Just as we're ending, because I know we are out of time almost, but again, we have to practice our own coping strategies, and these are some of the ones I really like. The grounding I do on a regular basis, as well as the muscle relaxation. For me, it's just recognizing where the tension is and trying to focus on breathing and relaxing. I use that one too. Behavior way to feeling better. Again, visualize how you want the next 20 minutes to go and behave your way into that ending versus feeling your way through. And in closing, just allow children opportunities to experience discomfort. If your goal is that the child is comfortable and happy, then your child is probably going to really struggle as life progresses and different things comes up. Try to figure out successes and acknowledge difficulty, being mindful of reactions. And again, our children are only going to be as healthy as we are. And so helping them by how we manage our emotions and how we're doing is going to be a reflection of them. And I had a lot of kids that will tell me, I don't want to be an adult. And I'll say, why don't you want to be an adult? And they say, well, adults don't ever look happy. We got, and it's interesting when you hear that, because I think we want our children to see that life can be happy. It can be difficult. It can be challenging. It can be a lot of work, but it can also be happy. So if you have any concerns for your family or for your child, if you're noticing any of these different areas and you're just saying, I don't know what to do, it's not that you're not a good parent. It's just that teaming up with someone to figure out maybe what needs to change is going to be your best bet. And again, every child's different. You might have 4 children at home, 3 children are doing great, but one child's really struggling. That one child might just need something different. And so it's not about being a good parent or not. It's about kind of growing with the child to help them develop that resiliency. This is just us. We're at the Center for Emotional Wellness, and we are in Arlington Heights and Crystal Lake. If you need anything, let us know. I also work with about 10 to 20 school districts, working with their families that are struggling each year. So we definitely have a lot of resources out there, but also talk to your school, talk to your pediatricians if you need any additional resources. With that, I'm gonna feel free, if I will stay on if you want to